Hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on developing conditional statements. My name is Heather and I'm part of the customer support team. So, we are currently running a series of webinars that will cover basics of reporting within workbooks. Thank you to those who have joined us so far on our previous sessions, and to anybody who has missed the previous session, the recordings are available on our website. We run these webinars every other Wednesday, and so the next one is on the 11th of June, where we'll talk about joining data to make it more readable. We also do offer a 2-day reporting course on site at our Workbooks office in Reading, which explores deeper into specific topics to improve your reporting skills and knowledge. For further details, please do reach out to your account manager. So the agenda for today's webinar is we'll start by talking about a brief description by giving by talking about conditional statements, then case statements, then we'll talk about the syntax for case statements, then we'll talk about the applications of case statements in workbooks. Then we'll try and build a simple case statement in workbooks, and then we'll try and build a little more complex example of case statement. And then finally, I'll try and answer any questions that have been submitted during the webinar. So, what is a conditional statement? Conditional statements allow us to perform different actions based on specific conditions. And in doing so, it allows us to account for multiple scenarios and outputting results based on the conditions we specify. The most commonly used conditional statements are the case statement, if statement, and the null if statement. In one of our previous sessions, we have touched upon the fact that Workbooks uses a cut-down version of MySQL. And MySQL is an open source code, and it has a lot of resources available publicly, which also means that a lot of the functions available in MySQL are also available when reporting within Workbooks. Now, following on from our previous slides, case statement is a branch of the conditional statement family, and the statement and when the case statement is executed, Workbooks will assess all of the conditions stated against a value on the field of our record and exit when a condition is met. In Workbooks, we can build case statements very easily using our formula builder within our calculated column. The next important thing we'll learn about case statement is the syntax for writing a case statement. So all case statements begin with the keyword case, followed by the field against which we want to test different values for. Following that, all of our conditions must be specified after the keyword when. So much like the line on the screen, you would enter your condition using the keyword when, your condition, and then the output you want. And you can repeat this line as many times as you like. And finally, we also want to make sure that we can also account for the fact if none of the conditions are met, we can have a output which is different from the ones we have specified in our conditions. And to do so, we use the keyword else. Much like this one, much like the line on the screen, we could, as I mentioned earlier, we can use a separate output altogether if none of the conditions have been met in our case statement. And finally, we end our case statement or exit our case statement using the keyword end. Right? Now, what else do we need when creating a case statement? Now that we know the syntax for writing a case statement, let's look at the table on our screen to try and understand what other items do we need when putting together a case statement. So we would need to identify the field on our record in Workbooks against which we want to test the values for. So our case statement, as I mentioned earlier, starts with the keyword case and followed by the field. Then we need to think of the conditions or the values we want to test against this field, and then what the output should be. So Following on from our syntax from our previous slide, we go with when value A, then output information technology, or when value B or C, then output the text miscellaneous. Again, we want to, if none of the conditions have been met, we want to output something totally different. So we would use the keyword else and then the bit of text we want to output. Finally, to exit the case statement, we use the keyword end. Right. So this is an example we have talked about in a previous um, webinar on if statement, which is an everyday example that we talked on about using the if statement. But in this webinar, let's try and build the same conditional statement using case statement this time, using case. So the example was when it is raining, then you should take an umbrella. Otherwise, leave the umbrella at home. So if we try and write a case statement for this, so the thing that we are testing for is the weather. So it would go next to the keyword case, followed by the condition. So as I mentioned earlier, we always start our conditions with the keyword when. So when raining, then to specify that we're about to specify the output we want if the condition is met, then take an umbrella. Else, leave umbrella at home. Again, we want to make sure there's an output if none of the conditions are met. So we use the keyword else followed by the text we want to output. And finally, to end the case statement, we use the keyword end. So let's talk about applications of case statement. Let's look at the example on this slide where a sales manager wants a report to show reps the customers whose contract value are under £15,000, and they should be upselling the products to them. So let's try and visualize what our case statement might output, right? So over here we have on the right hand side of the screen we have a column called is upsell required, and where you can see the upsell required text is next to the is outputted for a customer for the first row where the net home currency is less than £15,000, whereas the row below the text outputted is no action required because the home currency is more than £15,000. We'll try and build this example within workbooks when we jump into a product. Right. Again, we have in one of our previous webinars, we have touched upon conditional formatting, but because today we are talking about case statements, so I thought conditional formatting is a good example to go over again. So we will again touch on this when we're in the product in a little bit more detail. Right. So this is an example of a simple case statement that we'll try and build within workbooks. So the example that we're going to try and build is we're going to try and assign organizations to different sales teams within the business based on the value on the industry field record of an organization. So in the table, as you can see, if the organization's industry field value is energy supply, we want it to go to team one, sales team one. And if the industry is education, we want it to go to team two. When the industry is manufacturing, then we want it to go to team three. And when the industry is professional services, we want it to go to team four. Right? And as I mentioned earlier, we will try and build this in workbooks. And then we'll try and build a more complex example of case statement, but it's not massively complicated. So over here, the marketing team wants to put a mailing list together based off customer contracts that are inactive and have contract net value of more than £10,000. So we want to use the case statement to look at if both the criterias, which is the contract is inactive and the contract net value is more than £10,000, is true. And if so, we want to add them to a mailing list. And we'll again try and build this example when we're in the product. So let's jump into a product. So let's look at the first example that we want to build within workbooks, within workbooks. So over here, we were going to try and build a report so that we can assign different organizations based on the industry sector, based on the industry sector they're in, to different sales team within our business. So let's start building the report. Right. So over here we have a pre-populated report where I have some columns that could possibly that will help us build our case statement, right? So we start by clicking on Add Calculator Column. Let's give this calculator column a meaningful title. So just a moment. Sorry guys, apologies. So let's give this a meaningful title. Let's call it Simple Case Statement. For the purposes of this webinar, I'm just giving it a title like so. Right. Now, to start off, to start building your case statement, let's try and use the formula builder that I referred to earlier on in the webinar. So conditional functions, then look for case statement, and now we have the case keyword to start us off on writing our case statement. The engineers have also put down the syntax of the case statement in case we forget, or if you want to refer to it during while we're building our case statement. So if you remember from the syntax, the field that we want to test values against comes next to goes next to the case keyword. So let's look for the field, which is industry, right? And now let's start defining our conditions. So our condition statements begin with the keyword when. Always remember to use opening quotation and ending quotation. Always enter your opening and closing quotation together because it just reduces the room for error. So the first value was, let's close this for a second. Minimize that. So our first value was energy supply. So let's go enter that in. Supply. So when energy supply, then we want to assign this to team 1. So again, enter your starting and closing bracket quotation marks together, and now let's enter the text. So we want to assign this to team 1, right? And it's also a good idea to copy and paste this if you're going to repeat this multiple times, but just make sure what you're copying and pasting is correct. So let's go and change the second condition statement. So we wanted to go to team 2 if this industry is education. And let's repeat this again. So when manufacturing, we want to assign this to team 3. Manufacturing. And then finally, we want to assign this to team 4 when it's professional services. And following that, if none of the conditions are met, let's just say else no changes required. And to close our case statement, let's use the keyword end. Now we could also use the keywords don't necessarily have to be in uppercase, but it makes it a little bit more easy to read. So therefore, I chose to type the keywords out in uppercase. So let's click save and close here. Now let's run our report. Right. So as you can, let's actually run this. Right. So as you can see, where were the industry field has a value of energy supply, it's been assigned to team 1. Whenever it's education, it's been assigned to team 2. And when it's when it's manufacturing, it's team 3. And professional services goes to team 4. And finally, if none of these values are matched, the text outputted is no changes required. Move on to to the second example of case statement. If a customer's if where a sales manager wants to report on customer contract whose value is under £15,000 and that the sales rep should be upselling products to them. So to do so, and to get a column like this on our screen, on the right-hand side of our screen, we will need another case statement. So let's open another report, which is just another basic report on customer contract, which just has the 3 columns, which will help us build our case statement. So again, we start off by clicking on Add a Calculate column, give it a meaningful title. Let's call it application. Oh, sorry, can't type. Application of case. Actually, sorry, I'll just use the title we had on our slide. Upsell required. All right. Again, let's use our formula builder, condition functions, case statement, and now because we're going to be using a mathematical operator here, we'll just change the syntax slightly. So instead of putting the field next to the case, we'll put it next to the condition statement, such as when. Now, the field we want to test for is net home currency is less than 15,000. Also, when comparing numerical values or currency fields, we don't have to worry about the currency symbol or the thousand comma separator. So £15,000, we wanted to output, and to define the output, we use the keyword then, and we want to output then upsell so required. And finally, if that condition isn't met, we want to output no changes required. And to do so, we use the else keyword, no changes required. Sorry, made a typo there. Changes required. And finally, finishing, exiting our case statement. So let's click save and close there. And let's run the report. Right. As you can see, the case statement is now comparing if the net home currency for the contracts are less than £15,000. And if they are, it's now outputting the text upsell required. And if it is either greater than, if it is greater than £15,000, it is outputting the text no changes required. Right. And now let's move on to our to the third example, which is a little bit more complicated, but it's not that complicated really. So for this, we'll be using a summary view. Yep. So like as we saw previously, we created a new calculated column. And what we want to do here is we want to create a report so the marketing team can add people or customers, add customers whose contracts are inactive and have a contract value of more than £10,000. So to do this, we'll use both mathematical and logical operators, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So let's call this complex example of case statements. Right. Again, we use the formula builder. Sorry. We use the formula builder to start writing our case statement case. And as we saw previously, because we're going to be using mathematical and logical operators, we'll put this on the next line next to the when after the when keyword. So let's start when. And now the first field that we want to test values against is the customer contract. So if we do status. So this status is a field on the customer contract, which will either have two values, either active or inactive. And the one we're interested in is the if the customer contract is inactive. So let's enter the text inactive. And now let's use the logical operator. So the logical operator we'll be using is the AND operator. So basically what this does is that it will make sure it will only output the result that we specify if both the fields match the values in the condition statement. If we were to use the logical operator OR, it would output the result if any one of the values on the fields have been matched. So let's carry on writing our case statement. So when parent status equals to inactive and the customer contract value is more than £10,000, so let's add our second column, which is net home currency is greater than 10,000, sorry, greater than £10,000. I think that's the right number of zeros. Then we want to output add to mailing list. So I'll just say yes, type yes. And then if none of if the customer if the customer contract doesn't fall doesn't match any of the doesn't match the condition above, we want it to output no. And finally, let's exit our case statement using the end keyword. Click save and close there. And now let's run our report. And now you can see that over here, it's only outputting yes if both the conditions we asked for, if both the conditions, sorry, if the condition, if both the field values match what's been specified in our condition. So over here, the customer status is inactive and the contract value is less than £15,000. So we will add this to our mailing list, and therefore the condition statement outputs the text yes. Whereas whereas if one of the field is true and the other isn't, we still output the value false, or we output the text no. Much like let's take an example over here. That's not a good example. Like I think this one is. Sorry, just a second. Oh yeah, sorry, apologies. Apologies. That is the cell highlighted on our screen is an example where the customer status is inactive and the value is less than £10,000. The net home currency value is less than £10,000. So we won't be adding this to our mailing list, and the conditions and the case statement works this out for us. Now, finally, moving on to our last example, which is on conditional formatting. So let's have a quick look. Basically, we want to output any, we want to color code our, let's actually run this report one more time before we actually dive in. So we want to highlight highlight the amount home currency cell in different colors based on the logic we define in our conditional statement. So let's have a look at the conditional statement that we are making, or the case statement. Okay. Actually, let me just zoom in a little bit. Right. So, as we saw previously, we always start our case statements using the keyword case, followed by the keyword when, the field name. Because we're using logical operator, we're putting the field name after the when keyword. So when amount home currency is less than 25,000 pounds, then we want the cell to be colored red, and yes, we want the cell to be colored red and the text to be white. So this is a CSS code, which you can find out, which there's a lot of information available publicly on the web. And then the second line on our condition statement is when the amount home currency is less than 45,000 pound, then we want to color this cell yellow and the text as black. And then when the amount home currency is less than 100,000, then color the cell as green and text as black. And if none of these conditions are matched, then we want the background to be white with red text. And finally, we end our case statement using our keyword end. Once that is done, we then go to the column that we want to add the conditional formatting to, click on style, and then we select this option, calculate conditional styling, to give so that we can input our own logic that we've put together in the case statement we created, and then add that column onto the add that column here. Then once that is done, we'll click save and close, and make sure to hide the styling column from your report view, because it might not make a huge amount of sense for the end users to see. So if we click on run here, right, and sorry, I should have hidden that styling column. Apologies. So sorry, little preview. Let's hide this columns, styling, and then click save. And now let's run it. Right. So as you can see over here, so the colors, so each cell on the in the amount home currency column is coded in different colors based on the values of the amount home currency. So if it's less than 25, it's colored in red with white text, and yellow with black if it's more than 25, and if it's more than 45, it's colored in green. Going back to our slide deck. Right. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of resources publicly available for MySQL, and these are just some of the resources that I use while putting together this slide deck. Right. To recap what we have touched upon, we have touched upon what is conditional statements, how we can use case statements, the syntax for writing a case statement. We have looked at examples of case statements and built some within workbooks. And then there's a lot of resources publicly available within available in the internet. Now let's try and see if there's if any questions have been posted. Great. Okay. So the next drop-in webinar. Sorry, just a moment. I think there's a question here. There's a question from Thomas Lav. Apologies if I didn't pronounce it correctly. We do have some of this. We might have some examples on our knowledge base, which we'll try and share with you, which I can try and share after this webinar. So yeah, I think there might be some examples within our knowledge base that shows how you could use different the you can use different reporting functions within Workbooks. Cool. Moving on. So the next drop-in webinar will be on joining data from different records, which is on the 11th of June. And then if you do ever need help and you're within Workbooks, you can click on the question mark symbol within Workbooks, and it will take you to our knowledge base. Also, it might be a good idea to just bookmark the knowledge base if you're going to be visiting it frequently for help. And then you can always get in touch with us if you have any questions or need assistance with anything, or contact your account manager. Finally, thank you for attending this webinar, and see you next time. Thank you.